Well, hi, welcome to the Christian Contrast, where we talk about how walking with Jesus leads us to live differently than those in the world around us. And the subject that I want to talk about is something that is significant for any of us who are a part of a church, whether you're part of Life Bible Fellowship Church or another church community, and that is how we best engage with the music time. And I call it the music time. Often we refer to this as the worship time, which is, it's not bad to refer to it that way. But sometimes we can get into a mode where we think that's equal to what worship is, where worship is much broader than just singing. Although singing throughout history, and certainly throughout biblical history, is a key way that we approach God in worship. And now, the interesting thing about this is that for some people, they relish the time of singing. I mean, they look forward to it. They would be good if we did about twice as much singing as we normally do. Maybe when they get to the sermon, they're like, can we shorten that and just do more music? And there are people who just absolutely love it, get wrapped up in it. It's their favorite part of what goes on in a church. And there's other people that either don't love it or are confused by it, or maybe even they very sporadically love it. Where there will be times that we're worshiping God through music and they get wrapped up in it. And it's this wonderful, joyful, worshipful experience. But those feel few and far between. And they're trying to figure out, well, how do I make that more frequent? And so I wanted to do this episode just to talk about some things that we can do to engage ourselves more in the times of worshiping through singing, because singing should not go anywhere. This is always a part of how God's people have offered worship to Him and have sought to be built up in the truth to one another. But to talk about how best we can approach this. Now, I do want to say something before I get into 5 pieces of advice that I'm going to give, and that's that I've occasionally run into people who are very, very musical, and maybe even like at a classical level, or they have perfect pitch, and their complaint has been to say, like, no offense to the music guys, but the level that they're at and the mistakes that are sometimes made, like I have perfect pitch. I'm used to high quality of music. I just can't handle it. I have certainly never had that problem. I do not have perfect pitch. I'm pretty monotone. I'm a terrible singer. I'm not terribly good at music. So sometimes I'll talk to Andy after a service and he'll talk about how the worship team messed up. And I'm like, I didn't even notice it. But I know that for some people, that's a big deal. You notice the mess ups, or you're just used to a certain thing. And so if something isn't really high quality, you have a hard time. Here's what I just want to say, because I think that this applies more broadly than this. Having a hard time with something is not the same as being not able to do something. So I am fully willing to stipulate that maybe for you, it is harder. You have an extra hurdle to get over that I don't have. Just because it's difficult doesn't mean you're supposed to abandon that. And there's just a sad sacrifice that sometimes is made by people who just say, hey, this is hard. I'm uncomfortable with this. It's hard for me to engage because of this. And so their response is, instead of saying, I'm going to push through because this is so important, this is so worth it, they just sort of take what I view as an easy way out and decide not to go through something difficult. We all want to lean in. When we get to something challenging in God's word, we want to lean in. When we come to a challenging step of faith in our lives, we want to lean in instead of retreating. And if for one reason or another, because you have perfect pitch or you have a certain expectation when it comes to music, it's hard for you to engage with what you view, or maybe what in reality is not as high of a ability to perform the music, I'm going to invite you, don't abandon that opportunity to worship just because it's difficult. Prayerfully look to lean in. Many of us have been overseas in different worship services where songs are going on and we don't even know what the words are. We're unfamiliar with the music, all of that. And yet we typically still find a way to joyfully engage because we're with people who are engaged in worship. I think that sometimes we act like this is something that's impossible. It's not impossible. You can engage. So that's opening encouragement. But now what I want to give is 5 pieces of advice. If you're saying, I don't really feel like I engage very much with the music, or I wish that I did more. I wish that it was richer more. Here's 5 pieces of advice that can help us with this. Number 1 is by far the most important, and that is walk with Jesus during the week. I think sometimes it's not terribly complicated why we feel disengaged from God during the time of worshiping through singing. And it's just because we're disengaged from him during the week. And we're banking on the idea that for, these 4 to 5 songs on Sunday, I'm suddenly going to get wrapped up in this beautiful, emotional, spiritual experience. And I'm probably not. If you're not even thinking of Jesus during the week, if you're not having times where you're praying and reading his word, if you're not running your decisions through a grid of what is Jesus calling me to do and how is the Holy Spirit leading me, then it's not shocking that you would come to Sunday and you would have a hard time engaging with what's going on during the time of worshiping through singing. The most significant thing for all of us is that we're walking with Jesus day by day in our lives. So I just want to say there sometimes are other reasons why we find ourselves having a hard time engaging with me. It's not always because we're just being lazy and just not walking with Jesus. But I'd say start with that. If you're saying like, I don't really engage well at those times, start with saying like, well, am I even engaging with Jesus during the week? Or am I just banking on this suddenly happening? Maybe in a similar way to where if you're married and you have a date night with your spouse, and you find like it's not awesome when we go out on these dates. Like we're not connecting at a high level. There's not a lot of joy. There's not a lot of laughter. There's not a lot of intimacy. Maybe it's because the rest of the week you're disconnected. But if you were connected and being kind to each other and thoughtful and prayerful towards each other, then that time, that date night would be something that would be much richer. Think of it in that same way. So at least start there. Say, am I walking with Jesus during the week? If not, why do I really have an expectation that this would be awesome? So advice, point number 1, the most important point of advice is walk with Jesus during the week. Point of advice number 2, sort of in this same ilk, is prepare beforehand for Sunday worship. Sunday worship being the time in the Word, often communion being a part of that, singing being a part of that, prayer being a part of that. Prepare beforehand. And this can be tricky, especially if you have young kids, because it can feel like a Herculean effort just to get everybody to the church service on time. And so it can feel very frantic in the morning. But the encouragement that I want to give is, if you are constantly sort of like up late on Saturday night and then just waking up and scrambling or rolling out of bed and then showing up at the church service, you're not setting yourself up for having a rich, heartfelt connection to God. If you're anticipating and preparing for the service, that's a great way to set yourself up for success there. And part of it may just be as simple as this. It may be that on Saturday night or on Sunday morning, either you as an individual or you and the family just pause, and maybe it's just for like 3 minutes. You just pray, God, prepare us for what we're going to experience today. Receive glory from our worship. Lead us into experiencing joy through your nearness to us as we draw near to you. Help us to, one of the prayers that I often pray for my family in general, but especially when we're preparing for Sundays, is, Father, lead us to experience your blessing and to be a blessing to others. I've shared before also that on Saturday nights, almost always at the dinner table, we read the passage that's going to be part of the sermon for the next day. And by the way, if you're like, well, Dan, you know the sermon because you're preaching it, I don't know the passage, you can easily know the passage. We do life groups that walk through the passages. You could just look in the life group booklet and find out where are we this Sunday. It's not a secret. We don't hide that information. So you could approach that with preparation. Once again, if we're on little sleep, up late, especially if you're up late and you're doing something that maybe is not the most edifying thing, like if you're out drinking too much, or if you just were staying up late watching movies that, well, maybe they weren't sinful, but they weren't really building you up in Christ. Sometimes we set ourselves up for failure, and then we're surprised that we don't feel very connected to God during the time. look to prepare. Saturday night, Sunday, be thoughtful. This is a major event. We are gathering with God's people to worship. We want to get all that we can from it. We want to experience all that we can from it. So prepare beforehand. So number one, just walk with Jesus during the week. Number two, prepare beforehand. Number three, zero in on the words. And this isn't going to be the most significant thing for everyone. Music moves us. I often, it's funny because when I'm driving around with my kids, sometimes I'll put on a playlist of like my favorite songs that are mostly from the 90s when I was in high school and when I was first getting into music. And to them, the songs are not meaningful in any way. But to me, they stir up these memories. And sometimes with the songs, I'm not even 100% like clued into exactly what the song is about. There's something just about the music that moves me. So God has made us in that way, that the music itself and the cadence and the instruments move us. But maybe you find that you're just not geared as much that way. That the music itself and the experience of it is not quite moving your spirit towards God in the way that you want it to. I just want to encourage you, zero in on the words. Maybe there's going to be one phrase that we're singing. Maybe there's going to be one line of a song that's really going to capture you. When we're singing about Jesus Christ, our living hope. And when you pause and you start to think about the idea of like, wow, the only reason that I have hope is because Jesus died for my sins and because he rose from the dead. And that means that I don't have a dead hope, I have a living hope. And so when I'm singing to Jesus, I'm not just singing obscurely to some divine being. I am singing to the one who died for my sins and brought me hope. And suddenly you may find yourself much more wrapped up in the joy of experiencing what's going on in the worship time. So even sometimes don't feel afraid to pause as you're singing. Maybe stop singing for a second and just think about the words and then re-engage with it at that point. Zero in on the words to remember that we're not just flatly singing songs because God likes a certain tune or cadence. We're singing songs that are pointing us to the amazing, wonderful truths about what God has done for us through Jesus. So if you're finding yourself stuck, zero in on the words. And fourth, and this is maybe coming at it from the other angle, involve your body. God has put us in physical bodies. And I think we have this unique thing in the United States and especially with our American culture where we value authenticity, which there's good things about that we don't want to be fake. We say, I don't just want to go through the motions. I don't just want to do something because it's supposedly the right thing to do. And so sometimes even in a worship service where we're told like, stand up, some of us are like, why do I need to stand? Or if we're ever told to kneel down, you might be like, I don't want to be told to kneel down. Or if we're singing a song and the song says something like, we lift our hands, and you see other people lifting their hands, and you're like, well, I don't want to lift my hands unless I kind of feel led to lift my hands. I'm not saying that you've got to lift your hands. What I'm saying is our bodies are a part of who we are. And there's reasons that in the Bible that there's this talk of, hey, we're standing, we're kneeling, we're bowing, we're raising hands, we're looking to the heavens. Involve your body to help reflect the truths that you believe, even if you're not feeling it in your emotions right in that moment. That's not being inauthentic. Raising your hands when you don't necessarily feel emotionally led to raise your hands is not being a hypocrite. It's saying, I'm recognizing this truth about God and I'm embracing it as true, even if I'm not feeling it right now. Beyond that, doing this, involving our bodies not only reinforces truths to ourselves, where we're able to then grab a hold of them more easily, but this flows into number 5 also. So far, hey, if you want to experience greater joy in the worship services, walk with Jesus during the week. That's by far the most important one. Prepare yourself beforehand, zero in on the words and take joy in what the words say. Involve your body. That's not being fake. That's just involving your whole self in it. And number 5 is look around. Sometimes, and I want to be careful in how I say this, sometimes when in a song you're raising your hands in response to God, it's not only that you're doing that for God, it's that there's somebody else who's watching who's going to be impacted by that. Now, the reason why I need to be careful in saying that is because that we can then turn that into something where like, hey, we're doing that so that other people think we're spiritual. And so that their takeaway is like, wow, did you see Dan during the worship time? That guy is really spiritual. That's not anything that we're shooting for. But I do think that there's something to the fact that we worship in this way together. We're not just all in our individual homes or our cubicles, we are together. And when you see somebody else wrapped up in expressing with their body and with their voice these great truths, that can be encouraging to you. So part of why I say involve your body, it's the most important part of that is to reinforce to yourself and to express to God these truths, even if you're not feeling them at that moment. But also because when we engage fully in this, we can also be a blessing to others. And we can also be blessed by just looking around. Maybe there's a song, and this has happened to me before, maybe there's a song that you don't connect with at a high level. It's not like the song is wrong or incorrect or bad or heretical. It's just a song that either the tune or the words, you're sort of like, I could take it or leave it. Like if we never sang this song again, I wouldn't miss it. I've had songs like that. And sometimes what I've experienced is looking around the worship center during that time and seeing the people who are just, this song, I mean, it's a 10 out of 10 for them. It is facilitating connection in their spirits for them with Jesus. And they are just soaking it in and having this rich experience there. And to me, it brings this encouragement, first of all, to say, I may not love this song, but I love that my brothers and sisters in Christ are finding this so helpful in worshiping God. So, hey, if we do this song every week, that's great. It's not all about me and my preferences. There's something great there. But also, maybe just in general, sometimes there's a day that you're sort of like, I'm just feeling kind of distant from God, or maybe not even just distant from God. Maybe you're feeling like following Jesus isn't really worth it. You're like, I'm going through some trials right now, or I have some unanswered prayers, and I'm just kind of frustrated. And I'm honestly like, I'm not worshiping with all of my heart right now because I'm not really sure, God. Like, I'm not really sure that following you pays off. I'm not really sure that you do keep all of your promises. And when you look around and see other people giving themselves to worship, there's something beautiful in that. Especially, and this is why the local church is so important, especially when you know something about the stories of those people who are engaged in worship. I know people in our church who have lost children, who have lost spouses, who have gone through ongoing chronic health problems, or who have had all kinds of trials in their lives. And when I see them engaged in worship, it's not only an encouragement just like, hey, another person thinks that Jesus is worth following, but to say, that guy who lost his son, whose son died, he thinks Jesus is worth worshiping. That woman who is still dealing with cancer and the prognosis is not great, she still thinks Jesus is worth following and worth worshiping. And it brings me back to that reality. There's not a Sunday that goes by that I don't take time to look around. And by the way, if you think that this is bad or something that you shouldn't do, both Ephesians and Colossians talk about the idea that when we are singing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, we're singing to God, but we're also speaking to one another. There's something about the togetherness that when we engage in worship through singing, we are speaking not only to God, but to one another. So I think it is thoroughly biblical to take in the idea that my brothers and sisters in Christ are speaking to me, that they're worshiping God and the praise is going to him, but they're also speaking these truths to me, and I'm going to avail myself of that. I'm going to take joy in what's going on around me, and I am going to look to draw near to God through that being facilitated partly through the other people who they are all in with what we're singing, even if I'm not feeling all in with what we're singing in this moment. All of us are going to experience the singing time in church differently. And I'm not saying that we all need to get to the point that it's our favorite part and it's what we wish we did the whole service. That people are going to be different in what they sort of prefer an experience, that's fine. But I do think God has more for us than we're settling for right now in the joy and in the closeness that we want to experience with God during those times of singing. Music speaks to our hearts. It has always been a part of how God's people have drawn near to him. So let's do it in a way that we experience the most joy and most closeness with God during that time. Let's do this by, first of all, walking with Jesus all week and not expecting an hour on Sunday to be a sudden epiphany where we feel extremely close to God when we haven't even been given him the time of day. Let's prepare beforehand on Saturday night and Sunday morning and saying, I want all that God has for me during this time. Let's focus on the words and pay attention to what it is that we're actually singing, because sometimes when the music itself is not stirring your soul, when you think of what it is that we're singing and the truths that we're repeating, that will bring your spirit closer to God. Let's also involve our bodies and take the risk to raise your hands. Take the risk to kneel down, to stand up, to whatever it would be, to move your body in a way that's reflecting what you want to experience internally, even if right now your emotions aren't all in with that. Involve your body, and then finally, look around. Remember that you're not alone. Remember that there's other people following Jesus, that their singing and their worship can be a blessing to you, and that you engaging is often going to be a blessing to them as well. I appreciate you taking the time to listen to this, and maybe even you want to leave a comment either as pushback or questions or something about what I've said, or maybe you even want to share, here's a way that I've done something that's helped me to engage more joyfully with the times that we worship God through singing. I would love that. We do have all the videos of Christian Contrast, including this one, posted in two spots. One is that you can find them all on our website, on our YouTube channel for Life Bible Fellowship Church. And the second is that you can find them on our church website for lbf.church. And part of that is that if you have found this helpful or encouraging in some way, we have a backlog of all kinds of episodes that you can check out that aren't all like super time sensitive. Something from 2 years ago might still be something that would help build you up to walk more closely with Jesus today. We put a new episode of the Christian Contrast out every 2 weeks, and so we'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode. Until then, thanks so much for taking the time to listen.